Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have the latest from the live radar, from the latest UKV, have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days, as we are in a very warm and dry spell now for the rest of the week, with temperatures potentially on Thursday, the first day of May, reaching 30 degrees somewhere across southern parts of England. Now unfortunately it's not happening on Wednesday, because it would threaten the all-time April temperature record. But falling in May, it is not going to threaten the May record. But regardless, it is still going to be very hot, oppressive at times, and yeah, pretty summer-like as we do progress towards the final third of spring. As we progress into the longer range, the high pressure that is bringing this warm, dry and even hot conditions for many isn't really going anywhere. It is going to move around, which could produce some slightly colder air masses at times, but generally speaking, it is still looking like this high pressure is going to have fairly moderate to high influence over the next few weeks. And that means that generally speaking, it is going to be dry. We will see showers, maybe thunderstorms at times, so locally there could be some heavy rain, but not expecting any massive barrages of low pressure, at least for the time being. Perhaps progressively into May it could get a little bit more unsettled, along with turning a little bit colder, but generally speaking we're not looking at anything terrible for the time of year. But of course we'll update that in the second half of the video. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe. Now if you start on the live radar, you can see as I'm recording this around 9 PM on Monday evening, it is a fairly dry evening and it's been a fairly dry day, and of course it's going to be a very dry week. Very little in the way of precipitation, a bit just flirting with parts of Western Scotland and Northern Ireland, but really just some petering away bits of rain and weather front out there coming in off the Atlantic. Now if you look at the temperatures, you can see it is still fairly warm across many central parts where the warmth is getting trapped, but for most, temperatures will fall away quite readily through the evenings. It is still spring, so overnight temperatures will still drop away into the mid-single digits. It's not that oppressive heat, at least yet, that we can see in midsummer. Could get there for a short period of time, Thursday, Friday, but for the time being, still a little bit fresh out there through the evening, so it shouldn't be too bad for sleeping. But as I said, it could get worse progressively this week. Now, if you look at the max temperatures on net weather, you can see generally speaking 2 to 5 PM was the peak temperatures today, hovering around that 22 to 24 degree mark, pretty much as expected. A degree or two warmer than yesterday, which was a degree or two warmer than Saturday. So we are on that upwards trajectory, peaking, as I said, on Thursday with 29 or 30 degrees. Now to go over to the latest UKV, we'll pretty quickly skim over the precipitation charts, because really not much is going on. It's a bit of cloud at times, maybe a few bits and bobs of drizzle across parts of Scotland, but for most it is bone dry, not too much going on. You can see progressively as we head towards the latter part of the week, the cloud will progressively clear, maybe a few odd thunderstorms, but you can see there could be, as I said, those storms perhaps popping up through Thursday, but where you avoid those. Sunny, dry, and pretty hot. Again, depending on how hot it gets, that could have an effect on how heavy those thunderstorms could be. Beyond that, though, we could see generally very pleasant conditions as eventually that real heat does start to dissipate away. Now, if you look at those exact temperatures, you can see as we progress in towards Tuesday afternoon, again, looking very similar today, a degree or two warmer though in the peak spots, 23 to 25, maybe an isolated 26. Still a reasonably cool night into the single digits for most, and progressively into Wednesday afternoon, even warmer, looking at a peak of 26, 27, 28. And again, if we look at those evening temperatures, for some dropping away to the single digits, but for many, maybe hovering in the low teens, so starting to get a little bit more oppressive. And Thursday afternoon, look at that, widely 27 to 29, peaking somewhere across southern parts around the 30 degree mark. I think it's Cardiff there, or Bristol there, which is getting around that 30 degree mark, in and around that portion of Wales and England, maybe further eastwards as well. And more importantly, Then the top temperature in the day is overnight temperatures not dropping away below the mid to high teens for some, and Friday once again pretty oppressive in the far southeast, 24 to 26 degrees, starting to turn cooler in the north though, as eventually some slightly fresher air arrives for Saturday, but still for many low 20s. So yes, still warm, but a lot more of a pleasant warmth there into the first weekend of May. Now, if you look at the latest GFS, you can see why this is occurring. High pressure is in control, looking very pleasant and dry. But you can see in towards the latter part of this week, there could be a slight northerly flow that does arrive. We thought it would be a bit more potent last week, but it's turning out to be more of a slack northerly flow, which means cooler air is going to arrive, but nothing too spectacular. As we progress further into May, that high pressure system still hangs around, but again, the wind direction is more from an east or northerly direction in that quadrant, which means generally speaking, air masses are going to be more around average for the time of year, which means again, we will see warm conditions, maybe low 20s, but nothing too remarkable. You can see here at 384 hours, the wind coming in from the east. Air masses are around average or slightly above average for the time of year. So pleasant, dry towards the middle part of May, but nothing too oppressive. So still high pressure involved progressively through May, but it's nowhere near as oppressive as it is going to be later on this week. Much more of a pleasant late spring warmth. Now, if you compare to the latest GM, again, that big southerly wind getting pushed up at the moment. Again, the risk of a few thunderstorms later on this week. And then eventually we do see that slight northeasterly into the weekend, turning it cooler before eventually towards day 10. Yes, still that high pressure involved, but the low pressure is a little bit stronger and got some slightly colder air mixed in within it. So although, yes, high pressure still firmly around, we would see cooler air masses and potentially even deeper lows. So yeah, that wouldn't be ideal. It's similar to the GFS, but a little bit more involved from that low pressure system, which does mean that it could be just a little bit more unsettled. And finally, if we compare to the latest ECMWF, again, broadly very similar, very dry and warm. But as we progress into the weekend, as the start of next week, again, more northerly flows, which would turn it a little bit cooler. But even out to day 10, you can see high pressure is still in control. It's just positioned slightly further westwards. That means instead of southerly flow, it's more of a northerly or easterly flow. And you can see some slightly colder air masses involved. Again, if we go to the surface, we're not looking at horrific temperatures. The upper air temperatures are hovering around average, so we would be looking probably around the high teens or maybe 20 degrees. But it still, as said, would be pleasant, just not as hot as it is right now. And we see this all sort of exemplified here on the ensembles. Very warm and dry over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 days. And then progressively into the weekend and start of next week, still some uncertainty and some scatter here, but returns back towards average. And precipitation, it's still low, but it does pick up a little bit. And unfortunately, that does mean there'll be some showers, there'll be some storms around in place, especially for northern and eastern areas where we see the slightly lower pressure arriving. But generally speaking, it's not a massive barrage of low pressure, and the upper air temperatures do slowly recover progressively into May, hovering around average for the time of year. And you can see the 2 meter temperatures are very similar. Big spike later on this week, even warmer at the when we have a look at the high resolution models, up towards 30 degrees potentially here. Only 25 degrees on the GFS here, not performing too well in these high resolution situations. But you can see into early next week, potentially back down towards the mid-teens, for slowly back towards the high teens, or maybe 20 degrees. So we are seeing a real taste of summer this week. But if you don't like those oppressive nights and those very warm, hot days, then it fortunately is only lasting, a handful of days. Probably Wednesday through to Friday would be oppressive for southern areas, and maybe widely, really only Thursday if you are further northwards. Elsewhere, it will be warm, but hopefully not too oppressive. We'll have to wait and see, though, exactly how it does develop beyond that, but definitely strong signal that it will turn a little bit cooler, a little bit more unsettled, potentially some thunderstorms, but generally speaking, the outlook isn't too bad for this time of year. We've had a lot worse things happen into early May, a bit of unsettled and a bit of chillier air around a high pressure system. Yeah, can't ask for much better than that, if we're being honest, without wanting some sort of record breaking heat or whatever. So yeah, very pleasant as we do progress. And you can see, similar to the GFS, the ECMWF is very similar. Well above average over the next week, even longer potentially, progressively into early May. So ECMWF definitely on board with keeping that warmth and the dry conditions around for a little bit longer. before eventually they do get back towards average. A lot of the ensemble members, and precipitation picks up a little bit, but again, nothing too substantial. So I have to keep an eye on how it does play out the rest of this week. But yeah, definitely a good call we made a few days ago, thinking that we could get towards 30 degrees this week. Definitely looks like a real possibility now on Thursday. Just a little bit unfortunate it's not on Wednesday, as we could be, as I said, challenging the all-time April temperature record, which is 29.4 degrees. So unfortunately not challenging that. So, 27, 28 is probably the peak on Wednesday before it gets up towards 30 on Thursday. But still, regardless, a very warm and dry spell. A great way to end April. So anyway, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.